Disturbing facts that will ruin your day, Part 6. There are only 2 days that do not last 24 hours. The one of your birth and the one of your death. Pacu is a South American freshwater fish known for its squarer, straighter teeth, that eerily resemble those of humans. This is how a toothbrush looks like under a microscope after the first use. Google hires camels for the desert street view. Terrifying urban legends that turned out to be true, Part 2. In October 1970, a couple reported seeing a man dressed in a white suit and wearing bunny ears who began yelling at them that they were on private property. It was then theorized that this man was the Bunny Man, an urban legend about an escaped mental patient in Virginia who took to gutting teens and hanging them from a bridge underpass. Locals were cautioned to never be caught near the underpass, which is now known to most people as the Bunny Man Bridge.
They're actually not, but I do have one that just wrote an hour ago called She's Here. It's story time. Take a seat. Those monsters taste horrible, by the way. Gerald Fredrickson was a disgusting man. From the time he was a small boy all the way to his teenage years, Gerald found pleasure in torturing animals and beating up kids that walked home alone, while other kids found interest in sports and video games. And being as big of a person as he was, there was almost nobody at any time that could ever tell him no or resist him. At the time he was 30 years old, Gerald was a full-blown menace with nothing but an ice cream truck to his name. 70 kills under his belt, all young girls and boys. The town was in absolute chaos, but nobody would suspect the jolly old ice cream man, Gerald thought to himself. So one day during a long and boring day of ice cream routes, Gerald decided to strike again. He had promised a young girl named Susan a few days ago a free vanilla cone. All she had to do was meet him at 9 p.m. sharp, just outside of town. Sure enough, 9 p.m. came, and Susan found herself walking up to the bright ice cream truck with the same red band in her head that she wore every day. Too easy, Gerald said to himself as he quickly turned the engine on. He shined his brights directly in her face and then punched the gas. The ice cream truck clipped little Susan, sending her flying across the street and barely clinging to life. Gerald then walked over to her weak body, scooped her up, placed her in the truck, and she was never heard from again. Just another victim of the mystery killer in town. What a hot little biscuit that was, Gerald proclaimed as he returned home after burying the body far away. He then sat on his couch and began to channel surf, but after a few minutes of that, he began to hear a small girl outside his window laughing. My God, those sound like Susan's laughs, Gerald said to himself, as he moved his large body all the way to his window, and then what he saw terrified him. It in fact was little Susan, but she looked very different. Her hair floating about wildly with no breeze. Her skin a very sickly gray color with cuts that were crawling with maggots, and a smile made of nightmares that went from ear to ear with rotten teeth visible. Oh Lord, she's here, Gerald screamed. He then quickly got dressed and ran all the way to his murderous ice cream truck. Gerald then locked his doors and prepared to make his getaway by fixing his rearview mirror, but what he saw petrified him. He was looking right into the eyes of his ghostly victim, Susan. Gerald then screamed and screamed and screamed. No one ever would find the body of Susan, but they did find Gerald. His skin was that same sickly gray color with cuts that were crawling with maggots, but his face was disturbingly contorted. But what confused the townsfolk the most was the red headband they found wrapped around his neck so tight that it cut through his skin and crushed his windpipe. It was the same one that little Susan had wore every day. From then on, every disgusting criminal that popped up in that town was found in the same shape as they found Gerald the ice cream man, with Susan's red bow tightly wrapped around their neck. Like and comment for more stories.
Can you do the one where the bride gets trapped in a chest? I know exactly which one you're talking about. It's called The Bride. This was a very popular one. So the story goes like there was a couple who had just gotten married, and during their wedding reception, they were having lots of fun, dancing, singing, and even playing games and contests. One of the games that they decided to play was hide and seek. The bride went up to the attic and was looking for a place to hide when she came across a giant chest. She opened the chest and climbed in, thinking nobody would ever find her in there, and that when they went up to the attic to look for her, she could pop out and scare them. Well, right after she had climbed into the chest, the top had slammed down and hit her in the head, knocking her unconscious. As she fell inside the trunk, the lid then slammed closed and locked. Everybody was looking for her, but nobody looked inside the trunk. After a while, they started searching elsewhere, searching all over the wedding venue and even all across town. Nobody knows how long she was banging on the trunk after she had come out of her unconscious state. But still, she was all the way in the attic and nobody could hear her. After a while of searching for her, all of her friends and family decided that she was gone and that they would just stop looking for her. Nobody ever knew what happened to her except for one day a maid was looking for something in the house where the wedding venue had taken place. She went up into the attic searching for this item and thought maybe it's in the trunk. So she opened the trunk and to her horror, the corpse of the bride was in the trunk, withered away to only a skeleton, wearing her wedding dress.
In January of 2013, a young woman named Elisa Lam flew to Los Angeles from Canada and checked into the Cecil Hotel. She was first placed in a hostel-style room, which she shared with another guest. But after 2 days, the front desk got a call.
Hi, I'd like to make a complaint. The woman I'm sharing a room with is acting very odd. I don't feel comfortable. Is there any way you could move her?
So Elisa was moved to a room of her own, and that was the last time anyone saw her. During her trip, she kept in frequent touch with her parents back home. But when they didn't hear from her when she was supposed to be leaving Los Angeles, they became worried and called the LAPD. Around the same time, the front desk kept getting more complaints.
The water pressure in the shower is so low. The tap water is all black.
So a hotel staff member went up on the roof to inspect the water tanks. He noticed that one of them was open. He looked inside, and that's when he found Elisa floating in the tank. To this day, nobody knows how she got in there undetected. But there are a lot of theories. See, Elisa had bipolar disorder and depression, and was on prescription medication to help keep her in balance. She kept a blog where she wrote about her struggles with her illness and seemed to be very open about it. The most logical conclusion is that Elisa was off her medication, broke from reality, and drowned herself in the water tank. Another theory is that she was playing the elevator game. The elevator game is a ritual that originated on a Korean website. When performed properly, you can supposedly be transported to another dimension. In order to play, you need a building that has at least 10 levels. It's best played at night since you need to be completely alone. You enter the elevator and go to different floors in a particular order. Once you reach the 5th floor, a woman will get on with you. Whatever you do, don't look at her or speak to her. She isn't human. When you reach the 10th floor, you exit the elevator and enter a new dimension. You will still be in the hotel, but only you exist. Be careful. In this dimension, your cell phone won't work, and you may feel disoriented and even faint. If you wake up without taking the proper steps to come back to our world, strange things may happen. So what does the elevator game have to do with Elisa Lam? After news spread of her bizarre death, a surveillance video from one of the hotel elevators went viral. It showed Elisa acting very oddly in an elevator, pressing random buttons, talking to seemingly nobody. Was she playing the elevator game? The Cecil Hotel has since rebranded itself to Stay on Main. They can change their signs, but they can never change what happened within its walls.
If this happens to you, do not open the door. Once there was a girl named Donna who lived with her father, but he went out of town for a business trip, so Donna was left alone in the house. Then one night she heard the doorbell ring. She went downstairs and was about to open the door, assuming it was her father. But she stopped. Something wasn't right. She looked through the peephole and saw her father staring back at her. His eyes were wide open and he looked terrified. But the doorbell kept ringing. Donna said, "Dad, did you forget your keys?" No answer. "Dad, say something." Still no answer. Donna said, "I'm not opening the door until you say something." Eventually the ringing stopped and Donna fell asleep. The next morning she looked through the peephole again. Her father was still there as if he hadn't moved all night. She finally opened the door and what she saw horrified her. Her father's head was hanging from above the door, and there was a note attached to the doorbell with only 2 words: "Clever girl."
This is the scary story about the voice. One night, a young girl was lying in bed, just on the verge of falling asleep, when she suddenly heard her mother calling her name from the kitchen. She then got up and began walking down the stairs to see what her mother wanted. But as she got halfway down the stairs, she heard her mother's voice from the top of the staircase say, "Don't go down there." I heard the voice too.
True scary stories in 60 seconds or less. This story comes from a Reddit user about the night that changed her life forever. In a rare occurrence, this girl's whole family was going out for the night. Her mother was going out, her sister wasn't coming home, she had the entire house to herself. So she just decided to curl up in her bedroom, have a cozy night in, and watch a Netflix series. But not even 30 minutes in, she suddenly heard noises coming from downstairs in her kitchen. the faint sound of an unknown man laughing to himself from downstairs. She was paralyzed with fear because she remembered she left her cell phone on the downstairs counter, but she also knew if she emailed 911, eventually somebody would come. She waited for 7 agonizing minutes until police eventually come, and there is an eruption of screams and wrestling from the kitchen. When they found her and brought her downstairs, she was told to close her eyes, as she later learned in horror that the man who had been in her kitchen had her mother spread out on the floor in pieces.
This is why you should never go to a sleepover. Back in 2013, a kid named John was sleeping over at his friend's house. John and his friend Robert were having a good time playing video games and staying up late. After a while, they decided it was time to go to sleep, so they called it a night. Robert fell asleep in his bed while John tried to fall asleep in his sleeping bag. John couldn't fall asleep because he kept on hearing these strange breathing noises. He thought it was Robert snoring, so he threw a pillow at him to wake him up. Robert woke up confused and said, "What's wrong?" John said, "Stop snoring, I can't go to sleep." As soon as John said that, he looked underneath Robert's bed and saw something terrifying. There was a man with long black hair underneath Robert's bed. The man put his finger on his lips and tried to shush John, but John started screaming in terror. And you won't believe what happens next. Like for part 2.
A teenage girl notices a pickup truck following her home one night after leaving a high school basketball game. At first she thought we must be going in the same direction, but then she began to watch the truck in her rearview mirror. When she sped up, so did he. When she passed a car, he did too. Then he turned on his high beams and left them on for quite some time, so she began to feel uneasy. She tried speeding away, but he would continue to follow her, flashing his high beams the entire drive. Finally, she pulled into her driveway, but the truck pulled in right behind her. She jumped out of her car and ran into her house, telling her father to call the police. But when police arrived, the man had a gun in his hand and told them that he wasn't the one they should be arresting. He pointed inside of the girl's now parked car, and there was a man crouched behind the driver's seat with a knife. The man had slipped into the girl's car just before she left the school game, and the man in the truck saw it all happen but had no way to stop it. So he followed her car, and each time the man in the back seat reached up to stab the girl, the truck driver would flash his high beams and the killer would drop back down into the seat to avoid getting caught.
Scary stories in 60 seconds or less. So this girl had worked at Nordstrom's as a seasonal employee every Christmas through college for the last 3 years. On her closing shift, it was only her and her manager, and she had the task of closing down the women's floor before she would clock out. After all of her nightly to-dos, she went to the women's dressing room to hit the lights before she was gonna leave. But she was startled by something. A pair of men's shoes that were under one of the dressing room doors. She was mostly kind of annoyed by this because they had already made announcements saying the store was closing, so she just kind of makes a declarative statement and says, "Sir, you have to leave the store, we are closing in 10 minutes. But she got no response, so she started to feel a little uneasy when suddenly the feet turned in her direction. But oddly enough, she wasn't feeling afraid, so she just approached the door and opened it. But then she froze. There was no one in that dressing room. This was not an instance of her eyes playing tricks on her. She saw feet and legs, and they moved under that door.
Terrifying things caught at hospitals. 2 friends were exploring an abandoned hospital when suddenly these students were recording a short film inside a mental hospital when they noticed something strange. This mostly empty-looking hospital in Honduras seems innocuous, but scary stalkers caught on camera. This scared man was recording a video with his phone saying that someone was following him.
I'm pretty sure I'm being followed. I've been taking a rather circuitous route. See that woman back there? I've been taking a rather circuitous route around. And she got interested in what I was up to.
This woman was returning home when suddenly this woman was peacefully walking around with her son, but then
Alright guys, let's talk about 7/25/2005 and what happened on that day. A SpongeBob episode aired that day and actually glitched out and caused static all over the TV and freeze frames to happen. These freeze frames weren't really normal though. A lot of them were really creepy and freaked a lot of kids out. For example, the one behind me. There was also a part where SpongeBob and Gary are just in a shoe and they're staring at the screen smiling for like an hour. A lot of people managed to capture this on YouTube, so I'm gonna play that clip right now and show you guys what happened that day.
SpongeBob? SpongeBob?
heard about the staircases in the woods? Apparently, deep in the forest, there are staircases that lead to nowhere, and you are absolutely supposed to stay away from them. So, 36% of the US is covered in forest. That's over 800 million acres. And there are elite search and rescue units that are deployed to search for people that inevitably go missing in these dense, wild, forested areas. And a ranger from one of those units authored a Reddit thread called, "I am a search and rescue officer for the US Forestry Service. I have stories to tell." And he describes these random staircases deep in the woods, miles and miles from any civilization that you are absolutely supposed to avoid. And during one of his first training ops, he would come across one of these staircases. A massive 10-foot wide carpeted staircase that he says looked like it came from a turn-of-the-century mansion. He says it looked so out of place that it almost seemed like a video game glitch. He began to take a step towards these stairs to check him out, but he felt the firm grip of his trainer's hand on his arm, and she just said, "That's not a good idea." And she held her grip on his arm and just calmly stated, "You're going to see them all the time. Don't touch them, don't go near them, don't go up them, just ignore them." And so he took her advice, but he could never really let go of the curiosity of what was going on with these stairs. So every time he would get close with one of the veteran rangers, he would kind of see if he could bring it up and see if they'd tell him anything. And he discovered that one of his buddies had a very similar training experience. He also saw a set of the stairs with his trainer, and his trainer basically verbatim said the exact same thing. Don't go near them, don't touch them, leave them alone, ignore them. But he didn't have quite as much willpower as our author. About a year into the job, he was on an op, they were looking for a missing little girl, and because of the way that the pattern was formed for the search, he was able to break away from the line without being seen after seeing one of these staircases. And as he approached the staircase, nothing really felt wrong, but he did feel like excitement because he knew he was doing something he technically wasn't supposed to do. And he noticed that the stairs were like brand new. There was no leaves or dirt or even bugs on them. So he started climbing the stairs. Step by step, nothing happened. But then he got to the top step and began to feel this undeniable sense of wrongdoing, like he was just committing some kind of heinous act. And he tried to kind of shake it off and just to convince himself that it was in his head. It's just a set of stairs, but the longer he stayed on the top step, the worse it got. Then he realized he couldn't hear anything, not the forest, not even his own breathing, so he went back down the stairs and rejoined the search and didn't say anything about it. The search ended that day, they didn't find the little girl, and when he got back to camp, he was reprimanded by his superior for climbing the stairs. He asked how he could have possibly known that he climbed the stairs, and he told him, "Because we didn't find her. We had a trail, and then the dogs lost the scent." I'm sorry, I'm out of time. Comment for part 2.
Legend or lie number 31, the white string. A girl in Japan wanted to get her ears pierced for her birthday, and although her parents disapproved, she pled and begged until they finally relented and gave her the money for it. But once the girl got the approval and the money, she decided rather than to pay somebody to pierce her ears, she could just have her friend do it and pocket the cash. So later that day, her friend heated a needle and popped it through her lobe, and immediately she knew something was wrong. She couldn't really describe it, but it was like a fuzzy feeling in her head. But she didn't really care, she just ignored it and went to spend the money her parents gave her at the mall. But the next day in class, her ear started burning, so she reached up and felt something poking out. She pulled and pulled and pulled until she saw this long white string coming out. And she was a little disturbed, but she just kept pulling and pulling, and it just kept coming and coming. She ran out of class and rushed to the bathroom, holding this long white string that she didn't know what to do with. And when she was in the stall, she decided it had to go. And she reached into her bag and got a pair of scissors and cut the string. Immediately, everything went dark. She started screaming so loud that the whole school came rushing to her aid. And when the teachers realized what was going on, they notified her parents and rushed her to the hospital. When she was examined, the doctor came out to talk to the parents, and he was stunned. He told them that somehow she had pulled out her optic nerve, and now that it was snipped, there was nothing he could do. She would be blind forever. But what do you think about this tragic tale? Is it true? Or are we all being strung along?
If you have any FM radio or AM radio or any kind of walkie-talkie, we urge you that if you hear static late at night, please respond with the words, "Ranger, Ranger." If you do not hear a designated ranger with a badge number respond to you, please ignore, as it is a walker. We do not understand how exactly this is possible, but we can confirm it is indeed a walker.